Managing the accounts payable function is a lot harder than it looks from the outside. I know one very competent accounting professional, actually an assistant controller, who took on the responsibility for the accounts payable function, thinking it was no big deal. After all, how hard could it be to simply pay the organization's bill? Now, those of you who already have this responsibility are probably laughing to themselves, knowing what a rude shock he was in for, and that it was. In fact, it was so overwhelming he retired a year early rather than deal with all the issues. So what are these issues that he and countless others encounter? Here are 5 of the biggest shockers. Shocker number 1, accounts payable is really much harder than it looks. Really, it is the hardest job in accounting, and that comes straight from the mouth of one financial controller. While the accounts payable function, yes, is about paying the company's bills, there are a lot of parts, a lot of moving parts to that function, and there are a lot of ancillary functions that have to be done in order to make it be done completely. There are a lot of regulatory reporting requirements. There's a lot of technology that goes into it, Excel, etc. In fact, at one point I sat down and made a list of all the different moving parts of the accounts payable function, and I came up with 107 different ones. And in fact, we'll put a link to that right up there. I think it's going to be there. It's either going to be there or there. I get mixed up with the directions with this thing. Anyway, so accounts payable, much harder than it looks, a lot of different moving parts, and I like to say about accounts payable, it's all in the details. Get the details wrong and you've paid somebody twice, a fraud has gotten through, you haven't done some regulatory reporting that you're supposed to, or some other disaster befalls you. Okay, and speaking of that, shocker number 2, suppliers don't return duplicate payments. Now, sometimes those on the outside say, all right, if we pay somebody twice, what's the big deal? They'll give back the money, right? Well, that's not always right, okay, because some suppliers absolutely don't give back the money. In fact, they try and hide it. They try and make it very difficult for you to even figure out that you've paid them twice. And other suppliers will issue a vendor credit. Now, vendor credits open up a whole other can of worms. It's a lot of work to actually find those credits, make sure you get credit for them, and you take them against a future invoice, and you get your full value. So it's a lot of extra work for accounts payable that doesn't have to be. But more importantly, with the vendor credits, many times they're not handled correctly, or the accounts payable team doesn't know about them, so they can't take advantage of them. A lot of problems. So much better get it right the first time. Don't make the duplicate payments. Don't have to worry then about dealing with that vendor credit. Shocker number 3, the amount of time that the staff, the accounts payable staff, spends answering questions from suppliers, other employees, management, and others is just staggering. And nobody takes this into account when they're allocating work in the accounts payable staff. Many organizations have suppliers who send in an invoice. In fact, they send in several copies of the invoice. That's another whole issue. And then they call up and they say, did you get my invoice? They'll call up again, when are we scheduled for payment? They'll call up again, why did you short pay me? When actually you didn't short pay them. You just took off the freight charge that they had included, that had been negotiated, that they were supposed to pay, or a myriad of other things. So a lot of time is spent just holding people's hand. Other things, vendors will call up and ask what was that deduction for, a reasonable request. They'll ask for help in applying credits. When it comes out to 1099 time and the staff issues the 1099s, they have to deal with all the people who get a 1099. They're not happy about it, and they call up asking for an explanation of why they got it. And we're not even going to go down the road of dealing with employees and their expense reporting and the, why won't you pay this, why won't you pay that, when in actuality it's not that the accounts payable team won't pay it, but management has set up the policy that the company won't pay for certain things, and the accounts payable team just has to administer it. Which brings us to shocker number 4. sure. The amount of tact that is required to work effectively in accounts payable is huge. Okay, not only do you have these employees who are very demanding about their expense reporting and why aren't you paying me this and why aren't you paying me that and what do you mean I missed the deadline, etc. But you also have very rude suppliers who are calling up. They'll be demanding information. They'll be trying to finagle around the accounts payable rules and regulations, if you will, trying to get an early payment. Sometimes they're out and out crooks calling up trying to defraud the organization, demanding payment now, etc. And the accounts payable team, they deal with all this, and they have to do it tactfully because that person on the other end of the phone might be a very important supplier, somebody who is important to your whole manufacturing process. So it's kind of a fine line. They also now are dealing with employees, and oftentimes these employees are at levels higher than them, wanting to know why they were not reimbursed for something. For some reason, many employees don't seem to understand that accounts payable does not set the travel policy. Management sets the travel policy, maybe in concert with HR to make sure that all the rules and regulations are followed, and all the accounts payable team it does is administered. So if they're not happy because something is not being reimbursed, they really should not be complaining to the accounts payable team, but they should be having this discussion with management, which of course they're not going to do. It's much easier to jump up and down in front of the accounts payable person, trying to browbeat them, if you will, into paying something. So that's a lot of tact and diplomacy goes into dealing with them. And don't forget, they also sometimes are dealing with criminals or fraudsters who are trying to defraud the company, and it's very difficult to tell, hey, is that a criminal or a fraudster, or is that a legitimate supplier who, for whatever reason, hasn't gotten paid in a timely manner. So a lot of diplomacy. Okay, shocker number 5. Accounts payable is not a big picture function. As I've kind of already alluded to, there are many moving parts, and as I think I've already said this, accounts payable is in the details. Get one of these tiny details wrong, and you could end up double paying someone, paying somebody for something that you weren't supposed to, or just paying the wrong supplier. And yes, you need to have a high level understanding of the issues, and you have to understand where accounts payable fits into the scheme of things in your organization. That's critical also. That's important, and the team needs to help the various different departments. But at the end of the day, the accounts payable function is all in the details, and you get those details wrong, you have a duplicate payment, the possibility of a fraud, paying for something that you shouldn't have, paying too early, missing an early payment discount. There's just a ton of different things. So as I said, 107 different moving parts, and I probably, by the way, in those 107 missed a few things. So to get a better handle on some of these details, we've put together what I call a crash course on accounts payable, which you should watch right now using the link that has appeared on your YouTube screen and is in the description. Good luck.